Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear further evidence from one of the fitters, Osborne Berry.
Yes, can we have Mr. Grahame Berry, please?
Thank you.
Please can I ask you to read out the witness affirmation text that appears on your screen?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare that the affirmation that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berry. Would you like to sit down and make yourself comfortable there, please? Yes, Miss Grange.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Berry, for coming to give evidence today. It's very much appreciated. I will be asking you questions today. If you have any difficulty understanding anything I'm asking you, please ask me to repeat the question or put the point in a different way. Also, please try and keep your voice up because the lady sitting to your right is transcribing everything we say and trying to get a clear note of your evidence. Now, you've made 2 witness statements for the inquiry. These are in a folder on the desk in front of you, and they will also appear in the screen. If we can go to the first at OSB 6086. We can see there's a date on it, 24th of September 2018. And if we can look at the final page, page 7, there we see the date again. And is that your signature?
It is, yes.
And have you read that statement recently?
Fairly recently, yeah.
Yeah. And are the contents true?
Yes.
And then if we can bring up your second witness statement to the inquiry, this is OSB 6091. And if we look at page 14 of that statement, there we can see it's dated the 27th of June 2019. And again, is that your signature?
Yes.
And have you read that second statement recently?
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yes.
And then you also gave a statement to the Metropolitan Police Service. If we can bring that up, it's MET 3019985. It's dated the 21st of August 2017. We can see that in the little date box between the 2 lines. Have you read that statement recently?
Not recently, no, but
No.
at the time, yeah.
Yeah. Can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yes.
Thank you. And Osborne Berry also provided a position statement to the inquiry, which I think you rely on as part of your evidence.
Yeah.
If we can bring that up, that's OSB 7084. There we go. That's the Osborne Berry position statement. Did you assist in the preparation of that position statement?
Yes.
And again, are the contents true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
And have you discussed your evidence with anyone before coming here today?
No.
No. Okay. So I first want to ask you some questions about your professional background and training. And you say at paragraph 3 of your first witness statement that prior to the incorporation of Osborne Berry, you'd worked as a fitter, carrying out work for Harley for about 20 years. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And did your work as a fitter involve the installation of building envelopes?
Yes.
Yeah. Were you fitting anything else, or was it really external facades that you were dealing with?
It was a variance of different things. Sometimes it was windows, other times it was facades. It
Yeah.
just depended on the projects as such.
Yeah. And would that work have included installing curtain walling, rain screen cladding facades, windows, doors and structural glazing?
Yes.
And we know that Osborne Berry was incorporated in 2002. So is it right that by the time that you were instructed by Harley in the Grenfell Tower project, you'd had around 32 years of experience in the installation of building envelopes?
Yeah.
Have you undertaken any formal training or qualifications in relation to the installation of building envelopes?
I went to a training course in Liverpool through a company called Cornier.
Yeah.
That was to do with curtain wall installations and windows installation up there. That was a 3-day course.
Yeah. And when did you do that course in Liverpool?
I can't honestly remember the dates, but it was around 2000 something, but I can't be exactly sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you try and keep your voice up a little, because you're
Okay.
a little bit faint, if you can try and speak as clearly as you can. Have you undertaken any formal training or qualifications in relation to the installation of rain screen cladding facades?
No.
And what about any formal training in relation to fire safety in terms of installation and fitting work?
No.
And originally, when you became a fitter, had you served as an apprentice before you did that?
I used to work in a factory actually manufacturing the windows.
Yeah.
So it was from there, it was a progress from there on to then the fitting side of things.
I see. Yeah. And just on the Grenfell project, I just want to establish this now. Did you yourself ever install any of the cladding, the insulation, the cavity barriers, or were you just supervising others doing the install?
No, I done it myself as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now, I just want to ask you some questions about your witness statement to the inquiry. If we can go to page 5 of your first witness statement, that's OSB 6086, page 5. At paragraph 1, you describe there that Osborne Berry's got 2 directors, small company, yourself, Mr. Osborne, I think your wife is the company secretary, is that right?
Yep,
And 1 employee fitter.
that's correct.
Yeah. And on the Grenfell project, is it right that you were known as Bez?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think we looked at this yesterday with Mr. Osborne, but Mr. Osborne's witness statement, paragraphs 1, 2 and 3, are very similar, almost identical to this. Did you prepare your statements at the same time?
As far as I can recall, we did, yeah.
Did you check your statement before you signed it?
I checked mine, yeah.
You did. Looking at this page 5, paragraph 1, you say in the second substantive paragraph, Osborne Berry undertakes work for private individuals, companies and local authorities. Osborne Berry provides the labour and fitters. This includes Mr. Berry and myself. Do you see that there?
That is a mistake, yeah.
Yeah. So you've referred to yourself as the third person?
Yeah, I did, yeah, obviously.
Yeah. Is it possible that that had been taken over from Mr. Osborne's statement?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Yeah, no.
You can't help us?
No.
Okay. Now, in terms of your engagement on the Grenfell Tower project, I want to ask you some questions about how Osborne Berry came to be instructed on it. And is it right that in August 2014 you took a telephone call from Mr. Ray Bailey of Harley about whether Osborne Berry was interested in working on the project?
That's correct, yeah.
And if we look at page 2 of your second witness statement, that's OSB 6091, page 2, and we look at paragraph 2, you say there in 2A, when you're asked what did Mr. Bailey communicate, you say Mr. Bailey simply explained that Harley had been asked to refurbish Grenfell Tower and would Osborne Berry like to bid for subcontracted work. Did Mr. Berry say anything else to you? Sorry, Mr. Bailey say anything else to you at that stage about the proposed refurbishment works, including what the materials would be that you would be fitting?
No, that was just a brief phone call, and then later on we had a meeting at his office to go through more details of
Right.
what was going to be used.
Okay. Can you recall when that meeting took place?
I can't recall the exact date, but it would have been some period of a couple of weeks to a month after the initial phone call, yeah.
Yeah. And then Mr. Osborne has said in his evidence that Osborne Berry submitted a competitive tender and that he was aware that other companies were also tendering for the project. Was that your understanding?
Yes.
Yes. Again, how did you come to find out about that?
Harley used various different subcontractors, and there's obviously different teams who work on different projects at the time, so it's probably just a known thing that other people are tendering for the job, not just a one company as such.
Yeah. Now, if we then turn to a document, this is OSB 7061, and we look at the top of this page. This is an email from Rob Maxwell. It is to you. We can see that when we look further down, and it's dated the 24th of September 2014, and it says, Bez, use this to price the project. Kind regards, Rob Maxwell. And then if we scroll down to the bottom on page 3, we can see that attached is an Excel document, Grenfell Tower Schedule of Quantities, E3317. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, let's just turn that up. So that's at OSB 7051. So here we can see it's for Grenfell Tower, and what this does is break down the materials to be installed in different parts of the tower, and it gives the metre squared of
correct,
the
yeah.
materials that are required. Did you look at this document at the time when it was sent to you?
I did, yeah.
And was it on the basis of this document that you priced the works?
That's correct, yeah.
And was it expected that Osborne Berry would insert its own figures into this document and then send it back to Harley?
No, it was more for us to work out square meterage price for ourselves, just to compile an overall figure for the job,
Yeah.
rather than filling out and sending it back that way.
Yeah. And is it right that you were the key person within Osborne Berry that was responsible for looking at the price and the terms on which Osborne Berry was engaged?
Yeah.
Yeah. And is it correct that you understood these to be the materials you would actually be installing on the project?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, then if we turn on to OSB 7046, this is an email from you to Mr. Maxwell on, so 2 days later, 5 days later on the 29th of September. And you say price for job, 252,465. Any problems, give me a ring and let me know ASAP. Is price okay to carry on working? Thanks, Bez. So we can see that you provided a lump sum figure for your work on the project. Can you help us as to how that price was calculated?
Purely from the bill of quants.
Yeah. So you go through, you work out.
Each individual area where the windows were would be an X amount of meterage for fixing that, which comes to X amount of figures, and then accumulated all the way down to the bottom, and then got to the price that we see now.
Yeah. And this is the submission of your competitive tender, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. Was there any other document at any stage that formed part of Osborne Berry's tender for the work? Was there any other information that you provided to Harley other than just the price for the job?
That was it.
That was it?
Yeah.
And there's reference there to give me a ring, let me know ASAP if price is okay to carry on working. What work was carrying on at that time?
I'm sure it was just purely just surveying work on the building itself,
Yeah,
not actual physical anything else part than that.
yeah. And it's right, isn't it, that Osborne Berry subsequently received a call from Harley confirming that you'd been awarded the job. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Was it Mr. Ray Bailey that called?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah. And was it you that took that call?
Yes.
And was anything else discussed about the job at that stage?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Now, if we look at page 3 of Osborne Berry's position statement, this is OSB 7084 at page 3. There we go. We can see at paragraph 12, it says there was no formal contract between Osborne Berry and Harley Facades due to their established relationship at the time. And so just to be clear on this, is it your evidence that there was no other contract documents that formed part of the agreement between you and Harley?
There was no other formal contract at all, no.
So nothing else which set out the terms upon which Osborne Berry was engaged to carry out the work, the standard by which those works would be carried out, the programme, none of those things were covered?
No.
Were they ever discussed verbally with Mr. Bailey? Did you have those kind of discussions orally with him?
Possibly about programme on the job, but nothing else apart from that, no.
So no discussions about the quality or the standard of work?
Obviously, because before this, the Grenfell, we'd done other projects in London. Little Vents was 6 tower blocks overall, and we'd done a tower block in Hounslow, the same thing. So obviously, because of our previous works, everything was okay. They just expected it to be the same as we carry on, just any other company we work for, sort of thing.
Yeah. Now, if we go to page 10 of your second witness statement, OSB 6091 at page 10, and I want to look at paragraph 16b. You asked the question, what caused Osborne Berry to be of the view that making good the inner seals and reveals, this is to the windows, was not within the scope of its work? And you say this work would have been within Osborne Berry's capacity, however, it was not specified work within our agreed package with Harley. So you're clear that it was never part of Osborne Berry's scope of works to do any works to the inner window reveals?
No, none at all.
But you say that would have been within Osborne Berry's ability and experience to do that, is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Was it ever explained to you on the Grenfell project why Osborne Berry weren't being asked to tender for that work as well?
I think Harley possibly tendered for it, but maybe they didn't get it. I don't know, but we were never sort of consulted about why we didn't get it or whoever, and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I see. Had you ever had any standard terms in the past that formed the basis of your contracts with Harley? Had you ever had any formal contractual documents, either from Harley or going between you back up to Harley, which
No.
set out the terms on which you were contracting?
None whatsoever, no.
No. And in terms of the standard of workmanship that Osborne Berry was engaged to provide, is your answer the same as the one you gave a moment ago, that it was just to provide the same standard you'd done on other projects? Was there ever any specific discussion about that?
No, just as before, that was it.
Yeah. Now, is it right that it was part of Osborne Berry's work to remove the old window panes, which consisted of a single pane of glass?
That's correct, yeah.
Well, presumably you removed the complete window arrangement, did you?
No, because the new windows were put on the outside of the building on a shelf angle, so it's further out from the building. We only had to remove the inside single bit of glass so we could carry out our work to put the glass on the inside of the building afterwards.
Yeah.
And then the existing frame was done by another contractor,
Yeah.
as far as I'm aware.
Oh, I see.
Yes, exactly. So the old window frame remained in place at the end of your works, and that was left for somebody else to deal with?
Yeah, originally the frames were supposed to come to site pre-glazed, so everything was inside the frame in one piece. But due to weight of them, we couldn't move them around the building, so they decided to then supply the frames on site with no glass in at all.
Yeah.
Then we go into the residence flats at the time, then remove the old single bit of glass, install the double glazed units, seal them all up, and then obviously then leave it to another contractor to finish off the making good on the inside.
Yeah. Now, you say that that work was left to another contractor. Were you ever made aware during your time on the project which contractor was carrying that out?
I saw the guys on site, but I didn't know which contractor it was as such, no.
Did you ever think to speak to them about the interface between your work and their work to make sure that the window reveals were, of the right quality, done properly, and were compatible with the work you were doing on the new windows?
I know Rydens took the guys who were doing the job, they went up there, done a sample, like we've done our samples on our stuff.
Yeah.
And then, as far as we know, that was part of Rydens' package, so they dealt with that side of things rather than us.
Yeah. Were you ever told what the materials were that were being used in the inner window reveals?
I saw the materials they were using because on some flats they had the materials outside the flats in the hallways, but I didn't pay too much attention. I saw it was a plastic material.
Did you see that they were using UPVC outer surrounds with combustible insulation board all the way around the outsides of the windows?
I saw the plastic line on the hallways prior to them going in the apartments that day, but I didn't see anything else whilst I was doing our parts of the work, no.
I see. And when you're referring to the plastic lying in the hallway, do you mean the UPVC?
Yeah, sorry.
The white
yeah,
UPVC?
that's correct, yeah.
I see. And did you ever consider, from a fire safety perspective, the interface between that work to the inner window reveals and your work, putting in the new windows, putting in the EDPM membrane and sealing it from a waterproofing point of view?
I didn't look at it on that side of things. I was more concerned of, obviously, the sealing on the outside with the EPDM of ours to make sure the building was airtight and watertight, but I didn't look at too much about the stuff on the inside as such, no.
Yeah, Mr. Berry, I think the transcriber's finding it quite hard to keep up with you. So I'm going to have to ask you to try and speak a little bit more slowly and try and keep your voice a bit up a bit.
Okay.
If you could, please.
Yeah. Now, if we can go, I want to ask you just a few questions about payment, since you were the one at Osborne Berry that dealt with that. If we can go to Osborne Berry's position statement, this is OSB 7084, and look at paragraph 5. So there you say Osborne Berry initially placed a bid for the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower in the sum of £270,000. This figure rose due to extra work required to approximately £325,000. Now, can you help us as to how that approximate figure was calculated when you put that in the position statement?
The first figure or the later figure?
The later one, the 325,000. You say there it's approximately. Can you help us as to how that figure was arrived at?
It's just an approximate figure. I can't remember unless I had all the invoices in front of me to know exactly what the whole figure was. But
yeah.
That was just a working out of a rough sort of gauge, again, approximate figure sort of thing.
I see. So is this right that you didn't actually go back and just double check the invoices? You did that, from memory?
Just roughly from memory, yeah.
We've had a look at the invoices and, first question, would that have been net of VAT, those figures you're giving there? Or would VAT be on top of that? Sorry, would VAT be included in that or not included in that?
Probably not included.
Right, yeah. So those net figures.
Yeah.
We've had a look at the invoices submitted to Harley between November 14 and March 17 and taken away any work that's obviously not on the Grenfell project, and it seems to amount to a little bit higher, 367,000. Do you think that that's perhaps more like the amount of work you did?
If that's the figures on the invoices, then yes, it would be right, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if we can now turn to OSB 7050. This is, we think, an email from you to Ben Bailey on the 28th of August 2015. And you say, "Hi Ben, this is the email I sent to Rob for Grenfell Tower. On top of this price is extras, which I discussed with your dad in a meeting at the office. I have a breakdown of this and can send it to you if you want. Thanks, Bez." Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And what you've done is you have cut into this email and pasted below the email that we saw previously of the 29th of September 2014. So this email you're sending is almost a year later.
Yeah.
Now, can you help us as to what were the extras referred to in this email that you say you discussed with Ray Bailey in a meeting?
It was more to the windows when they were supposed to come pre-glazed, but they didn't, so it was another visit inside the building to put the glass in. So that was an extra over on the original price. There was some EPDM work which wasn't shown on the bill of quants or even I think on the original drawings we had, which was X amount of metres around the building, so that added up at an extra on the cost as well. And I think some of it was to do with some Metset work, which is like a steel frame building which makes a structure in between the concrete. And that was some other extra work we weren't aware of. So I just went in and saw Ray Bay and just discussed and sat down with some notes I had on a notepad of the extra stuff I was asking for.
Yeah.
And that's all it come to, yeah.
Yeah. You talked there about extra EDPM work. Was the position that when you tendered and did your original price that no EDPM had been included, and then when you got to site you realised it did need to have an EDPM membrane, or was it extra EDPM work?
No, it was EPDM work to go around the frames itself, because once they were in the building, because they were so far out from the building, there was obviously a gap away round which needed to be waterproofed and air tested as well. So the EPDM work was included onto that afterwards.
After, so all of the EDPM work came as an extra later.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And can you help us? Who was it who identified the fact that the gaps were so big they would need this EDPM seal around the outside?
I think it was when Mark done the original sample window on the 15th or 16th floor, I can't remember which floor it was.
Yeah.
Installed a sample window so the client, Rydens and other people could come and see it.
Yeah.
And obviously there was the interface between the two there was a gap there as such, so they decided they're going to put EPDM around it to make sure it's weather tight and airtight as well.
Yeah. Now we heard about that mock-up of the windows on the 15th and 16th floor. We heard about that from Mr. Osborne yesterday. Can you help us as to when approximately that was done? How far into the project? I mean, were you on site already when you did that, or did you go in to do that before you got to site?
I think it was done prior to me going there, but I can't be 100% sure.
And can you help us just whether that was 2014, 2015?
I would have said 2015 myself.
Yeah. Okay. And you've said that Ryden were there for that mock-up, and presumably people from Harley, is that right?
I would have thought so, yeah.
Can you be more specific as to precisely who was there for that mock-up exercise?
I can't remember, because I can't remember if I was there on site at the time or not.
Yeah.
I do remember once I got onto site seeing, obviously, one had been fitted, but I can't remember if it was prior to me being on site or not. I can't remember.
Yeah. And you're clear that one of the things that came out of that mock-up exercise was a need to put an EDPM membrane around the outside of the gaps in the windows.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if we can turn now to OSB 807. This is one of the invoices from Osborne Berry to Harley Facades. This one's dated the October 2015. And I just want to ask you a few things about what's in this invoice. If we look in the third line from the bottom, can you see it says Bez and Taff, no work for 1 day, £360. Do you see that there?
I do, yeah.
Can you help us as to what that item is referring to?
I can't remember what it refers to as such, but obviously there was a day we were on site with nothing to do, so we had to charge them for physically being there for the day.
Yes, I see. Did that happen frequently on the project, that you were there but had no work to do?
Not frequently, I would have said no.
No. But occasionally?
Maybe occasionally, yeah.
Yeah. And then the final line there reads, 8 men, no work for 1 day, machines up in air to look like working. Can you help us as to what that's referring to?
I think that was a time where we had no materials on site for that particular day or so, and Ryan's had a client meeting with potential clients for another building, so they hardly asked us to be up in the air to look like we're working, so it was like a normal building site as such, rather than people just sat downstairs doing nothing.
I see. So when you talk about the client, do you mean the TMO client visited and Rydens were anxious to make sure they could see building work progressing?
It was Rydens, but I don't know who the client was as such.
I see. And did you do that? Did you go up on the mast climbers and make it look like you were working?
Yes.
And how long did you do that for?
Just for the day.
For the whole day?
By a lunch break, obviously.
Yeah. And was that just a one-off occasion where that occurred, or did that ever happen again on the project?
As far as I know, it was just a one-off occasion.
Yeah. Now, some questions about choice of materials now. If we can go to page 2 of your first witness statement, that's OSB 6086, page 2. And if we look at paragraph 4D, you're asked the question, was the exterior of the building compliant with relevant building regulations, fire regulations, etc.? And your answer is, I do not know the answer to this question. I worked on the basis that all materials supplied to us for installation by Harley were compliant. Now, I just want to ask, did you ever have any discussions with anybody at any time during the project about the compliance of the materials you were fitting with the building regulations or any other relevant legal requirements?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No. You never had those discussions with anybody?
No.
Did you ever have any discussions with anyone on the project about the fire performance of the materials that you were installing? Did that topic ever come up?
No.
Did you ever discuss the fire performance of what you were installing with Mr. Osborne or anyone else internally within Osborne Berry?
No.
Or with Harley?
No.
Did you ever have any reason to consider yourself the performance of the products you were asked to install in terms of their reaction to fire or their combustibility during your time on the project?
No, because we use similar products on other buildings, the same material as such. So if you've done it on previous buildings, we just assume that it'll be the same on this one, there wouldn't be any problems.
Yeah. Now, when you say we use similar products on other buildings, we heard a little bit about that from Mr. Osborne yesterday, and he referred, for example, to Little Venice and the Hounslow project.
That's
and
correct,
I think
yeah.
one on Commercial Road as well, is that right?
Commercial Road was one as well.
Yeah. And when you say there were similar products, was it just the outer panels that were similar, the ACM panels, or was, for example, the insulation and the cavity barriers similar?
The insulation was similar on Commercial Road.
Yeah.
And then the actual panels themselves were similar to, it was a different company, but one was Renabond and one was, can't remember the name now, it was beginning with A.
Yeah.
It's used on Little Venice.
Yeah. And when you say the insulation was similar on Commercial Road, do you know what type of insulation you were installing on Commercial Road?
It was either a Kingspan or a Celotex. I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of them two.
So it was a solid board insulation.
That's correct, yeah.
Did you know what type of product it was? For example, whether it was a PIR, polyisocyanurate, or a phenolic foam insulation? Did you know that?
No.
No. And Commercial Road was how tall? Can you help us?
About 20 floors, approximately something like that.
Yeah. So a tall building.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the cavity barriers on those projects? Were you using ciderized cavity barriers?
We're using a cavity barrier, but I can't remember what manufacturer it come from, to
Yeah.
be fair.
Okay. Had you ever heard of the term Class Naught or National Class Naught in relation to the fire performance of materials?
No.
No. Now, in your witness statement, you say, this is page 2 of your Met statement, you say that you didn't have any concerns about the materials because you'd used them before. Does that summarise in essence, your view about whether they were acceptable for use, that simply because you've used them before on other projects, you just assumed they could be used on this project as well?
Yeah, because it's the same height of building, similar sort of products as well, so yeah.
Yeah. Can we turn now just to look at the outer panels, on the cladding panels themselves, and if we can bring up BBA, I think it's 5047. Sorry, 6047. Yeah. So this is the BBA certificate for the Renabond ACM panels that were being installed, the aluminium composite panels. It was issued in January 2008. We could get that towards the bottom of this page in the pale blue box. Have you ever seen this document before?
No.
And so it must follow, therefore, you didn't see it on the Grenfell project.
Not that I'm aware to, no.
If we turn in on this certificate to page 3, at the top there's a general section, if we could focus in on that. In the third paragraph it says, it is important for designers, planners, contractors and or installers to ensure that the installation of the cladding is in accordance with the certificate holder's instructions and the information given in this certificate. Were you aware at any stage on the Grenfell project of being provided with instructions from the manufacturer? That would have been Alcoa or Arconic.
No.
So again, does it follow that you didn't check any manufacturer's instructions before you installed the ACM cladding?
That's correct, yeah.
In terms of that installation, how did you know how to install it? Were you simply following Harley drawings, or were you drawing on past experience of installing panels?
Mainly Harley drawings, and this system was different to the ones we'd done before because it was a hook-on system.
Yes.
So there's only one way you could install the panel onto the building anyway, with the rails and the hook-on system anyway, so yeah.
Yeah. Had you ever worked with a hook-on or cassette system before in installing these types of panels?
Not this type of panel, but a similar panel. It was an aluminium panel with a hook-on system at, I think it was Newham Hospital in
Right.
London.
Yeah. Okay. And then if we go to page 6 of this certificate and look at section 10, it says in section paragraph 10.2 there, it says installers must be trained and approved by the certificate holder who can provide technical assistance at the design stage and at the start of the installation. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Did Osborne Berry ever receive any training from the manufacturer by Alcoa or Arconic?
No.
Do you know whether Osborne Berry was approved as an installer by Alcoa or Arconic?
Don't know.
Were you aware at the time you were installing the panels that the way they were being fixed on the Grenfell project differed from the standard Arconic detail for the cassette system?
The system we've used before was a riveted system.
Yeah.
And obviously the Grenfell was a hook-on system, so that's the only difference that
Right,
we're aware of, yeah.
So you weren't aware that there might have been differences between how Arconic would, as a standard, recommend the cassettes to be installed and how you were installing them? For example, the types of bolts that they were hung onto?
No.
No. What did you think at the time you were working on the project? What did you think was inside the core of the panels?
It was a black material of some sort. We've used it before on different projects as well. It could be a plastic, it could have been plastic, I don't know, but you can definitely see the black material inside the core itself.
Yeah. So you said it might have been a plastic. Did you actually know at the time you were installing it what the core was?
No.
And did you know it was a plastic?
Maybe when we had to cut some on the main roof area, we cut some panels down up there, but when you're cutting through aluminium and possibly a plastic core as well, yeah, but it wasn't totally aware of it as such.
Yeah. So you didn't know that the core was made of something called polyethylene or PE?
Not at the time, no.
Had you ever heard of polyethylene or PE in relation to those panels?
No.
Did you ever have any discussions about the fire performance of the panels or the core with anybody on site?
No.
And were you aware, I think, when you were installing the panels on the main part of the building, that the core of the panel was exposed all around the perimeter of the panel?
Yeah, I knew that, yeah.
Just on the mock-up, you've helpfully referred to the mock-up that was done on the 16th, 17th floor. Can you recall whether you already had drawings by that point Presumably you must have had some
There
drawings.
was drawings on site at that point before
Yeah.
we'd done the mock-up, yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Osborne talked yesterday about a drawing where some red pen had been applied to the drawing with handwriting,
Yeah.
to show where the cavity barriers were. Do you recall that drawing? Can you recall
Can't
anything?
recall it, but it possibly would have happened, yeah. But I can't honestly remember because it was a long time ago.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a few questions about the insulation now. Were you aware of what the different types of insulation were that were being used in the tower between levels 4 and 23 on the spandrels and the columns?
I knew it was a solid Kingspan Celotex material as such. That was it, yeah.
Yeah. So you knew they were either Kingspan or Celotex. Did you know anything about the specific product that they were?
No,
So you didn't know that the Celotex was RS 5000
no.
or the Kingspan was K15? Was some of the Celotex unbranded, like plain, in the foil on the outside? Can you remember that?
I can't honestly remember. There might have been.
Yeah.
It was, when we had deliveries on site, it was a forklift that brought them in pallets at a time. We just stacked them up in the compound we had and then obviously distributed them around the building as such. But I didn't pay too much attention to if it was branded or not branded, to be
Yeah.
fair.
Can we look at a photo at this point? This is RYD 51704. Now, we looked at this photo yesterday with Mr. Osborne. If we could focus in on the bit above the mast climber on the left-hand side. I think Mr. Osborne confirmed that if you look 3 levels up from the mast climber right on the far left, you can see some insulation. So either side of the branded Rainabond panels, you see some insulation which appears to have the Kingspan marking on.
Yeah,
Can you see that?
I can see that, yeah.
And is it right that Kingspan was installed on the spandrels and some of the columns?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
Yeah. And can you help us as to which face of the building this is? If we pan out again now. We showed this to Mr. Osborne yesterday, and he thought it might be, I think he thought it might be the east face. Can you help us?
I think that's the west elevation as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. And why do you think it's the west?
Just purely because on the east elevation there was some big trees and other stuff in the way, and I don't think you'd be able to get an angle on a camera to take a clearer picture like you have on that one.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. We know it's either the east or west face because it's only got 2 inner columns.
That's correct,
So,
yeah.
Yeah. Can you remember when you were first asked to install, or when you first started installing the Kingspan K15 product as opposed to the Celotex product? Do you have a memory of the Kingspan suddenly being there as well?
I wouldn't say it suddenly appeared there, but there was a difference in delivery. Different company that supplied the material as such.
Yeah.
One was a company called SIG, I think it was, that
Yeah.
delivered the first lot, and then the second lot, can't remember the company's name, but it was a different coloured lorry with a different stuff
Yeah.
on the back of it as such from Kingspan, yeah.
Yeah. So does that mean you have a clear memory of 2 separate deliveries of Kingspan to the site?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember the dates, but there was different deliveries, yeah.
Yeah. And were you told anything about why the Kingspan was being used in substitution for the Celotex?
No.
And can you help us, where would the Kingspan have been used? We can see it was used there on the west face, if you're right that that's the west face.
Yeah.
Would it have just been distributed to everybody on site that day and therefore potentially gone all around the building, or would it have only gone to certain faces that you were working on at the time?
It would have been depending on how far each side of the building, who was working on which side of the building, if it was the west or the north or not the south, as far as I know. And it would have been distributed around different floors as the building was going up, because every elevation was progressed at different times, because one was started first compared to the other one. So
Yeah.
this one could have been the 13th floor, and the one on the side there could have been the 15th floor. I don't know for definite, but they were used at different times, different heights of the building.
Yeah, thank you, that's helpful. So I now want to ask you some questions, some more detailed questions about cavity barriers. So can we just look first at page 7 of your first witness statement? This is OSB 6086 at page 7. And if we look at paragraph 11, you're asked there about training that Osborne Berry gave to those installing the facade and windows. And in the second sentence, you say Osborne Berry had no involvement in relation to the fitting of cavity barriers. Do you see that there?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Is that right? Does that remain your evidence that you didn't have any involvement in the fitting of the cavity barriers?
At the time, we classed them as fire breaks, but obviously in hindsight now, with everyone's it is a cavity barrier as such, yeah.
Yeah, I see. So the reason you've answered that way is because you remember or you thought what you were installing was a fire break, not something that was categorised as a cavity barrier.
Exactly, yeah.
I see. But you accept that you did install cavity barriers, horizontal ones, vertical ones on the exterior of the building?
We did, yeah.
Yeah. Now, we know that... Sorry, just before we get to that. Yes, no. Yeah, if we look at the schedule of quantities that was provided, the bill of quantities again, this is OSB 7051. And if we look at page 2 of this, we can see under zinc rain screen to columns at the top of that page, we can see that vertical fire stops are listed as the second to last item in that list.
Yeah.
Can you see that there? 362 metres there of that. And then a little further down the page, under zinc rain screen to walls, we've got horizontal fire stops, 2,152 metres. So we can see that a lot more horizontal fire stops were going to be required than vertical. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
And was it your understanding, when you were pricing up the job and looking at this, that those two items, the vertical fire stops and the horizontal fire stops, were two different products?
At pricing, no. Not until we actually got onto the site. We found out they were two different. One was the intermittent strip on the front, which was on the horizontal, and the vertical ones wasn't. It was just a plain fire stop itself.
Yeah, a full fill fire stop.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So just to be clear, at the time you were looking at this bill of quantities early in your involvement, is it your evidence that you didn't understand that vertical cavity barriers were generally different from horizontal ones in terms of that distinction? One's got an intermittent strip and one's a full fill block.
It all depends what was agreed with, obviously, the architects and the clients at the time.
Yeah.
Previous projects we've used different products, but not with an intermittent strip as such. We've used one at Hounslow. It was more of a foiled, very thin piece of material that was fixed the same sort of way, but a completely different design aspect from another company as such.
Yeah. So, again, does it follow from your answers that you didn't have any experience of installing these kind of cavity barriers on a building prior to the Grenfell project?
We've used them on other ones, yeah, but not with the intermittent strip as far as I remember.
Right. Had you ever used the Siderise cavity barriers before? Had you ever used cavity barriers by that manufacturer?
Not that I'm aware of. We might have done, but I can't remember.
Yeah. If we could just pull up briefly, this is HAR 408991. These are the Harley specification notes for the project, which we now know that Kevin Lamb put together. Do you remember ever seeing these on the project?
I can't remember seeing them as such, no.
Would you normally expect to see a specification like that, or would you normally expect only to see drawings?
On a drawing, you'll see a specification in the right-hand side of what, on that particular one you're doing. If it's a window, it will give you the specification of the style of the glass that's going to be on there, or if it's showing one with insulation on it, there'll be, again, on the right-hand side, there'll be a column saying what each product's on that drawing itself.
I see. The Harley drawings that we've looked at and we've had for the project, didn't have, for example, the main insulation product specified, so it didn't have the Celotex or the Kingspan specified on it. But do you have a memory of having drawings that did have that insulation specified on it?
Maybe not the manufacturer's name of the thing on it, but maybe on the horizontal it might have said on the side there 2 lots of 80mm insulation as such, but not maybe the name of the company as such, yeah.
I see. So you knew you were installing 2 thicknesses of 80mm insulation, and then when you got to site, you would then be provided with those boards.
That's correct, yeah.
And you would install them.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't necessarily know until the moment of your install exactly what the product was.
No.
And would the same apply to the cavity barriers, that you wouldn't know until you literally started installing those barriers what the product was?
They might have said that we were getting delivery of the cavity barriers next week and the name of the company was supplying them, but that would have been it, yeah.
Yeah. Now, on these specification notes, on the right-hand side, around halfway down the page, it says fire breaks refurb zones. And we can see there that the distinctions being drawn between 2 different products, the horizontal and the vertical, with the horizontal being ventilated breaks and the vertical being full fill non-ventilated breaks. Do you see that there?
I do, yeah.
So can you help us, when did you first understand on the Grenfell project that there were these 2 types of cavity barriers?
When the first delivery turned up, which would have been the horizontal one with the black strip on it, we saw that.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until we're doing the verticals further down the line that the different product come in then for that.
I see. If we can turn now to SIL 50230. This is some of the siderized marketing material for the 2 types of cavity barriers. Can you help us? Did you ever see this kind of marketing material when you were installing the barriers?
I don't remember, no.
And if we go to SIL 50227, this is more siderized marketing material, which also contains some installation guidance within it for those installing the barriers. And we can see at the bottom of that page, you've got the horizontal application barriers and then the vertical ones. The horizontal ones there have got green tape on the outer face. Is it right that on the Grenfell project they had just a strip of green tape on the top of the barrier?
From
Is that right?
the pictures I've seen, yeah.
Yeah. And what about the vertical cavity barriers? Do you remember them having any particular markings?
Not particularly, no.
So in practice, when you were on site, how were you distinguishing between a horizontal cavity barrier and a vertical cavity barrier?
Because the horizontal ones had the black strip on the front edge of them.
Right, I see. And just to be clear, did you read any guide that looked like this at the time you worked on the project?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Can you help us as to what guidance would have been given to the fitters that you had instructed to work on the project about the installation of the cavity barriers? How would the fitters know what to do with them?
We done their first mock-up, and after that we took them up there, showed them the initial mock-up, and then took them on to other mast climbers and explained to them how we wanted it done, showed them how we wanted it fitted on the building, and then after that they were working either beside us on another machine or on our machine as well, so we were watching how they were fitting it and making sure we were happy with the quality of work and stuff like that.
Yeah. And when you were training the fitters, did you draw a clear distinction between what a horizontal cavity barrier looked like and a vertical one?
At the time, on site, there was only the horizontal ones there on site anyway, because the verticals would be done later on.
I see.
And we did explain to them that when the vertical ones turned up, they were completely different to the horizontal ones.
Yeah. So what was the time gap between the installation of the horizontal barriers and the installation of the vertical ones? Can you help us?
I'd say a good 2 months or more.
Right. Yeah. So the horizontal all go on and the insulation goes on top, yes?
That's correct, yeah.
and then the vertical ones go on.
Because everything was done with the shelf angles and the windows were installed in the building. Then obviously in between that we filled in the horizontal fire breaks and the horizontal installation on that structure as such. The vertical structures, the brackets had to be made, and there was a different type of rail system that was being used. They had to be manufactured as well. So it's more concentrate on the horizontal aspects first, getting that part of the building done, and then going on to the vertical ones afterwards.
Yes, okay, thanks. That's helpful. If you didn't have any guidance from the manufacturer as to how to install the cavity barriers, how could you be sure that they were being installed correctly?
Because the mock-up we done, the original sample we done was inspected by Harley, Rydens, building inspector, building control, people like that, come and inspect it to make sure they're happy with what the sample looked like, and then for us to progress on after that.
Yeah. So is it right that you would be relying on Harley and Ryden as part of that mock-up exercise to flag up if there were any problems with the cavity barrier installation?
Yeah.
But I think you said that did you actually have any vertical cavity barriers to put as part of that mock-up?
Not on the horizontal one, no.
No.
It was purely just a horizontal one to start off with, and then I'm sure later on there was a vertical one done as well for them to come and check that as well.
Yeah. Now you also just said that building inspectors and building control would have looked at that mock-up. Do you have a clear recollection of somebody from RBKC Building Control being there looking at the mock-up exercise?
I don't remember I remember them coming to site because Mark explained they were coming to site to inspect it.
Right.
And after they've inspected it, they come back and said, OK, that's fine. And then for us to proceed after that, we didn't do anything until it was checked and everyone was happy with it.
I see. So you had a clear understanding, did you, from what you were told by Mark, that Building Control had seen the mock-up and were happy with it?
Correct, yeah.
But they couldn't have seen the vertical cavity barriers at that stage, could they? Because they weren't installed.
They weren't installed, no.
So how far, can you help us, how extensive was the mock-up? Was it just one window and what was above and below it? I mean, how far out from the window did the mock-up actually extend?
It done the whole width of the frame itself.
Yeah.
So literally from column to column, it was filled in completely as it would be on the rest of the building.
Yeah. But you hadn't put anything on the columns itself? Is that right?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So it stopped short of the columns?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, just one more point on the Side-a-Rise literature. Did you ever look in practice at the Side-a-Rise website on site or any Side-a-Rise videos as to how to install these barriers?
No.
If we look at page 6 of this Side-a-Rise guidance, we can see there's some installation recommendations there. And if we look at it's discussing the vertical cavity barrier. In the first paragraph, it says Side-a-Rise cavity barriers for rain screen cladding vertical is installed within the cavity formed between the rain screen facade and the inner structural wall using appropriate Side-a-Rise support brackets. Just pausing there, were you aware that you were using Side-a-Rise support brackets when you were on site?
I wasn't aware what manufacturer it was from, but we were using a bracket as such, yeah.
Yeah. And then it says this cavity barrier is fitted vertically under compression, completely filling the void. The product is installed with the plain mineral fibre edge positioned against the structural wall. Do you see that there?
I do, yeah.
Now, can you help us? Was there any sense in which the vertical cavity barriers were installed under compression when they were put onto the Grenfell building?
Because they were coming oversized, then they were trimmed on site to fit tight against the panel as far as I was aware, yeah.
Right. In practice, did the panel provide any form of compression?
It would have been with the shape of it, yeah.
I see.
Because it wasn't a straight flat panel, it was on an angle, so as you fitted it and then moved it round to the side rail, that would give you the compression side of things on that.
Right. And were your fitters told that they had to compress the panel in when it was fitted? Yeah. Sorry, the barrier in when it was fitted?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Mr. Osborne explained to us yesterday that the reason these barriers had to be trimmed on site is because the columns twisted as you went up the building, so that the gap that you were putting the cavity barriers in changed in terms of its dimensions.
It did, yeah, because the concrete itself was never straight and true and flat. So there was obviously a deviance on measurements from, say, the bottom of the building to the top of the building anyway.
Yeah.
So there would have been a large one ordered and then trimmed on site to suit.
Yeah. And do you yourself have a memory of actually physically installing vertical cavity barriers and trimming those down on site?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. And how many columns would you have installed vertical barriers on compared with the other fitters, for example?
Possibly about the same.
And how many would you do each? Can you help us in
Um,
practice?
I suppose because they were done more towards the latter part of the job. If I was working on one elevation, I'd probably do two columns as such, and they'd be on the machine beside me doing the same principle again. So we'd do fairly the same amount as such.
Yeah. And how did it work in practice? Did you do a section of the vertical building first and then work downwards or upwards?
We'd go upwards.
You'd go upwards.
Yeah.
And would you always install a barrier from bottom to top in one go, or would that work be interrupted depending on where the mass climbers were?
Only if there was a mast climber tying the way, you'd have to leave a gasp out, and that would be it. But apart from that, it would be from bottom to top.
Right. Okay. At the time of the Grenfell project, did you generally understand that the purpose of cavity barriers within rain screen systems was to inhibit the passage of fire from window openings into the cavities, and also to inhibit the spread of fire within the external cavities? Did you understand that?
Yes, stop the fire moving, yeah.
Did you understand how the cavity barriers were intended to operate in the event of a fire?
They were formed between floor to floor and flat to flat, horizontally and vertically, yeah.
Yeah. And what was your understanding of how the horizontal cavity barrier would work in the event of a fire?
With the intermittent strip, that when a fire broke out, that would expand out and fill out the gap between the panel and the intermittent strip itself.
Yeah. Did you understand what the consequences might be of poorly fitting cavity barriers? For example, if there were gaps in the horizontal barriers, did you understand that might mean then, once they activated in the event of a fire, there would still be gaps?
At the time, I didn't think there was gaps as such, and not until we've seen the evidence recently that there was gaps there, yeah.
I see. So your evidence is that you weren't aware that there was any gaps around the cavity barriers?
No.
What steps did you take to ensure that all Osborne Berry's fitters working on the project understood that cavity barriers needed to be tightly fitted with no gaps?
We did tell them various parts of doing the job that is what they were required to do, yeah.
And did you ever have to remind them? I mean, how did it work in practice? Did you ever become concerned in practice that they weren't tightly fitted and so you had to go back and remind particular fitters to do it?
I don't remember particularly reminding anyone in particular, but at different stages of the buildings we'd go up ourselves and look at different elevations and check things ourselves anyway, and we were happy with what we saw.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Ben Bailey, when he was giving evidence to us, was asked whether he ever gave any instructions or guidance to Osborne Berry about materials to be used in the cladding system. And he said this, he said, other than the cavity barriers being an important part of that, I don't recall any specific conversations about topics further to that. That was at day 40, page 138, line 7. So he's singling out he's saying that there seem to have been some conversations about cavity barriers being an important part of the system. Do you recall having conversations with Harley to that effect?
Can't remember a conversation, but possibly there was talk of it when they'd done the sample in the first place, of how it was to be fitted and what important part it was, yeah.
Did Mr. Ben Bailey or anyone else at Harley ever give you or anyone else within Osborne Berry any specific guidance in respect of how the cavity barriers were to be fitted?
No.
So is the position this, that there was the mock-up, which had horizontal barriers in, everyone was happy with that,
Yeah.
the fitters were shown that, and then they were asked to replicate it?
Exactly, yeah.
So no further instructions were given about the cavity barriers other than just seeing that mock-up?
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Osborne explained to us yesterday that when the mock-up was done, it was realised that the horizontal cavity barriers needed to be raised to make sure that they didn't penetrate the EDPM membrane. Do you have a recollection of that?
I do remember Mark's explained to me that that's the position he got them in, was to raise them up to rather than penetrate the EPDM.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he discussed it with someone from Hardy to say that it had to be raised up, and that was the reason why.
Yeah. Does that mean that it wasn't you having those discussions? Those discussions were Mark Osborne?
Yeah, I remember Mark done the mock-up, and then I was working another part of the building, and then when it was complete, I went and checked to see what he'd done, and he explained to me that he raised it up because of that, and obviously spoke to Hardy about it as well.
Yeah.
They agreed with the scenario that had to be raised as well, yeah.
Yeah. So you were hearing from Mr. Osborne about the raising up. You didn't ever discuss that directly yourself with anyone at Harley?
No.
And in practice, how did you measure where the cavity barriers should go? I mean, how did you know how high up to be installing them,
From
for
the
example?
original sample we done, there was a set measurement off that, and that's how it worked off the rest of the building.
I see. So does that mean that as part of the mock-up exercise, they would have raised, or your understanding was they raised up the cavity barrier?
It did
to
raise the
take
cavity barrier on the original mock-up itself, yeah.
So once they'd raised it up, we're happy with the mock-up, measurements are then taken and then distributed to the rest of you, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Have you yourself had a chance to consider the parts of Dr. Lane's report which highlight poor workmanship in the installation of the cavity barriers? For example, horizontal cavity barriers installed in the vertical position, poorly fitting and cut cavity barriers with rough edges and gaps, or cavity barriers cut around cladding rails creating gaps. Have you seen those?
I have seen Dr. Lane's report, yeah.
Do you agree that those photographs appear to show that there was poor workmanship in the installation of the cavity barriers on site?
From the pictures I've seen, yeah, I've seen them particular ones, yeah.
Did you ever notice that on site?
I didn't notice it on site at all, no.
Can you help us as to how it might have come about that we now have photographic evidence of poorly fitting cavity barriers or cavity barriers in the wrong orientation, and that wasn't picked up on site? Can you help us as to how that situation might have arisen?
I can't see how it's arisen because of the other checks that people have come around after we've installed the stuff ourselves. There was checks after we've installed all our stuff on the building anyway, the insulation, the fire breaks as such.
Yeah.
So I can't see how that got missed, to be fair.
And just, can you help us, who is it you understood would have checked the cavity barriers in the insulation before the panels were being installed?
As far as I'm aware, it was Ben Bailey.
Right. Mr. Osborne explained yesterday that would often be only a small time gap between installing the cavity barrier and then putting in the insulation boards around it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but there would have been times where lunch times or at the end of the day there would have been areas open that weren't completed as such, which someone could inspect at that time. So there was never ever a time where someone would have been up the building and every area was completely finished.
Yeah.
As such, yeah.
So is it your evidence that, in your view, there would have been plenty of opportunities in practice for anyone inspecting that work to have seen the quality of the cavity barrier installation before the insulation was put on as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ben Bailey said he found the pictures in Dr. Lane's report shocking. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, yeah.
Now, I'm not going to take you to all the pictures in Dr. Lane's report because you've just given the answers you've given, but what I do want to ask you about a little bit more is this point about horizontal cavity barriers installed in the vertical position. If we can just look at a photograph of that in Dr. Lane's report. This is BLAS 608 at page 48. If we can just blow this up, this is figure 8.52 of Dr. Lane's first report in phase 1. And what we can see here is she's highlighted an RH, a horizontal cavity barrier, installed in the vertical position. And we can also see that it's been installed with the intermittent strip facing into the building. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Did you ever see any examples of that while you were on site?
I didn't know.
Had you seen that installed in that way, what would you have done?
Replaced it, taken it off and replaced it with the correct one.
If we can just look at another photograph. This is from the BRE report that they did for the Met Police. I didn't look at this photograph yesterday, but I want to today. It's MET 3039807, and I want to look at page 52. So this is a report that the BRE did for the Met. It's dated, I think it's February 2019, and it's once the BRE had finished its site inspection work after the fire. And here we've got figure 34, and they've got in the caption under the bottom, open state cavity barrier being used as a closed state barrier installed with intermittent strip facing concrete. Do you see that there?
Do you?
And if we look at the paragraph below this, the BRE say this: vertical cavity barriers were installed on columns which coincided with compartment walls and on corner columns. These appeared to BRE to have been intended as conventional closed-state cavity barriers, wherein the mineral wool construction of the cavity barrier ought to be compressed between the surfaces of the cavity. The vertical cavity barriers removed were siderized Lamitherm RH25, i.e. the same barriers used at horizontal locations. As mentioned above, these barriers, designed as open-state barriers, but here being improperly used as closed-state barriers, comprise a foil face and intermittent strip sealing the leading edge. Do you see that there?
I do, yeah.
So Dr. Lane's investigation that she did after the fire and the BRE's investigations have both indicated that they were finding vertical cavity barriers which were horizontal and not true full fill vertical cavity barriers. Can you help us as to how that situation might have come about?
I can't explain it, to be fair, because they were two different products installed in two different areas on the site itself.
Yeah. Is it possible that some of the fitters, some of the installers working for Osborne Berry were left to their own devices when they were fitting these barriers and installed horizontal in the vertical position without there being any checks of that?
Most of the time we were always on site looking at what people are doing on various mast climbers around the building, so I can't see how it's happened, but I can't see how it would have happened as such.
Yeah. Was there any specific instruction or training given to the installers when the vertical cavity barriers arrived? You say that was later, you didn't have those to start with. Do you recall actually talking to them and saying, right, these are different?
These are different. They were completely different pallets stored in a different location on site.
Yeah.
And you could see the complete difference. One, like I say, one had the black strip on the front, the other one didn't at all. So we did say these are the vertical ones, these are horizontal ones.
Yeah.
And the same thing again, we done a mock-up. We showed them how the mock-up was done and then explained that was a repetitive thing around the building again from there.
Yeah. And can you help us about this? If as we see, some horizontal barriers have been installed in the vertical position, wouldn't that mean that at some point you might have run out of horizontal barriers?
No, because they would have been fitted first before the vertical ones.
I see. Because we're just a little bit puzzled as to how you would have enough horizontal barriers to have installed them horizontally and then to have had some left to be installing vertically, as some appear to have been done in that way.
Like I said before, the horizontal ones were always fitted first on the whole building prior to the vertical ones anyway.
Okay.
Well, then, I'm slightly surprised you had enough horizontal ones left over to use them as verticals.
I can't explain why there was more left over. Maybe when you buy a X amount of that, you get a pallet full of it or something. I don't know. I can't remember.
Right.
Okay. Do you agree that the works we've seen in these photographs and then the works You've said you've already looked at Dr. Lane's photographs. Do you agree that those works were unacceptable and not carried out with reasonable skill and care?
They were unacceptable, yeah.
Cavity barriers around windows. Perhaps if I can just do this short topic and then we could break. That would be
Yes.
a convenient moment. At the time you were working on the Grenfell project, were you aware that there was extensive industry guidance, including in something called a Approved Document B, which indicated that cavity barriers had to be installed around window openings in order to comply with the building regulations?
No,
Had you ever, in any other previous projects, installed cavity barriers around windows?
no,
Had you ever installed mineral wool or rock wool compressed around window openings?
no,
Had you ever heard at the time of Approved Document B on fire safety
no,
or looked at any of the diagrams in it?
no,
Did you notice at the time that there were no cavity barriers around the windows at Grenfell Tower?
I didn't know because we followed the drawings we were supplied and we fitted it to them drawings.
Were you surprised that there was no mechanism around the sides of the windows for inhibiting the passage of fire round the edges or the head or the sill of the windows? Were you surprised about that?
No, because it's similar sort of design work we've done on previous projects before.
Right. Did you ever have any discussions with anybody on site about the fact there weren't any cavity barriers or other form of fire stopping around the windows?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a good moment.
Would that be a good point?
Yeah, we're doing well, but I think it would be sensible to break now,
Yeah.
and then hopefully I can finish my remaining questions fairly speedily, and then we'll have the final break.
Right. Okay. Well, Mr. Berry, we're going to have a short break now. We'll come back at 25 to 12, please. And while you're out of the room, I have to ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much. Now, if you go to the usher, who's down there, she'll look after you. Right, 25 to 12,
Thank you.
please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Berry to come back in, please? Right, ready to carry on, Mr. Berry?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Yes, Miss Grange.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions arising from your evidence this morning. You told us that the horizontal cavity barriers were installed sometime before the cavity barriers on the vertical columns.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify one thing about that? Does that mean that there were horizontal barriers going round the columns, weren't there, as well as vertical ones?
Yes.
Were those horizontal ones on the columns also left till later?
They were, yeah.
Yeah, so you basically get the spandrels done first, then later you come back to the columns, is that right?
It was horizontal and vertical at the same time, yeah.
Yeah, horizontal and vertical at the same time on the columns.
As you're going up the building from bottom to top, yeah.
On the columns?
Yes.
Yes, I see. And then I think you also referred to the fact that there was a second mock-up in which the vertical cavity barriers were shown, is that correct?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, yeah.
Did you yourself see that second mock-up?
Yes.
Yeah. And what steps were taken to ensure that installers saw it and were given instruction about, say, the difference between the horizontal and the vertical barriers and how the vertical barriers should be fitted?
The same as we done with the original horizontal one. We took them all over there, explained to them how we're doing things, and then took them onto the mast climbers on the other side of the buildings and done our own sample and showed them as we went up how to do it on the same mast climber.
Yeah.
And then they were then moved to the mast climber besides and worked alongside as we went up the buildings.
I see. And would you be keeping a close eye on them when you were on an adjacent mast climber?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So now just a few more questions on that same topic, really, about supervision and training. If we look at Osborne Berry's position statement, this is OSB 7084, at paragraph 7. So there, you say you began work around the end of August 14 and completed it around June 16. And in the second sentence, Osborne Berry did not subcontract the work. However, they used normally 8 up to 14 self-employed fitters throughout the installation process. You see that there?
Yep.
On what terms were the self-employed fitters engaged by Osborne Berry?
They were on a day work basis only.
Right. And is it correct that the company usually recruited its fitters by way of an agency?
Sometimes we have used agencies in the past, and on Grenfell we did as well, yeah.
Yeah. What steps would you take to satisfy yourself, or what step did you take on the Grenfell project to satisfy yourself of the installer's competence and suitability for the work prior to them beginning any install?
Was this the guys from the agencies or the other guys?
Well, if it's different, tell us about both.
There's no difference as such. It's whoever come to site. We then put them with either me or Mark or someone who's been on there a while, who's competent enough to do the job, and then they'd take them on under their wing and show them what to do as well.
Is that with the agency staff?
Agency would have been the same as well, yeah.
Exactly the same?
Yeah.
I see. Did you have a means of recording who was working on the project at any particular time?
We didn't. We had a site diary just putting names down and where they were working on some elevations and stuff. But there was a from ridings themselves. They would have had every time you went through the site, you had a fingerprint scanner. So that would have been recorded on their system.
Yeah.
How many people were on site and who was on site as well.
I see. Now, if we can look at an email at this point, this is OSB 7080. This is an email much later in time. In fact, it's after the Grenfell Tower fire. It's headed training. It's from Ray Bailey to you on the 8th of August 2017. And he says, "Hi, Bez, as part of our QA system," is that quality assurance system? Is that how you would
Possibly,
understand that? "We need CSCS and train course details for all of your operatives." And he's enclosed a chart that we used on a previous project to give you a start. Where he's referring there to CSCS, is that Construction Skills Certification Scheme
That's correct, yeah.
details?
Yep.
Now, Did you ever get a request for similar information on the Grenfell project? We can see here that in August 2017, you're being asked by Ray Bailey to provide those details. But did you have to provide them on the Grenfell project?
No.
When did the change come about in your
This is
mind?
the first time I've received something from Ray about this situation as such.
Right. And what project was this for? Can you help us?
I can't remember the project or such, or what it was involved with as such, but only reading the email now, I can obviously, it's got sent to me, but I can't remember it 100%, but yeah.
Yeah. If you had received such a request during the Grenfell project, would you have been able to provide CSCS and train course details for all of your operatives?
Yeah, because you can't go on site without a CSS card
Yeah.
to work on a site as such anyway, so you
Right.
need a CSS card to go on site to work.
Yeah. And what about, I think he means training course details, does he there? Or
Train course details could possibly be on the training as such, yeah.
Yeah.
But most of the time it was on each particular job we've done the training on site, because every job is just slightly different. But training courses can be either ice path tickets, plasma tickets, which is down to tower scaffolds, or the iPath tickets for not mast climbers, scissor lifts or cherry pickers as such.
Yeah. So is it right then that if you'd been asked to provide training course details for all your operatives on the Grenfell project, that you wouldn't have been able to do that because they were trained on site?
Yeah, but plus we had training on site from Harley themselves for asbestos awareness course, and we had one on there for a harness course as well.
For a harness course, okay.
That was on
Yeah.
the Grenfell one itself.
Yeah. If we can now turn to another email thread. This is OSB 7053 at page 2. And I want to pick it up at the bottom of page 3 and on to page 4. So this is an email thread which is in relation to the Grenfell project. It's from you, I think, to Jason Maher. And is it right that he was from Total Site? Is that what he's called?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, about labour on the Grenfell project, yes.
Yeah.
And if we look, so we can see on the 20th of August 2015 you sent the email, and if we look at the top of the next page for what you said, you say, on the rates, can we negotiate at little? I was hoping to pay £15 for a fitter and £13 for a fitter's mate. Do you see that there?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Can you just explain to us the distinction between a fitter and a fitter's mate?
A fitter is a person who can fit the stuff in the building, and a fitter's mate is literally helping him lift stuff on, hold things while he fixes it and stuff like that. That's what it's just a term in the trade. It's a fitter's mate.
I see. And you'd have both employed on the Grenfell project, would you?
Yes.
Yeah. Then at page 2, if we follow this email chain through a little bit, at page 2 at the bottom of the page, Mr. Maher writes to you on the 21st of August at 1419, and it's about labour requirements. And then I'm afraid we have to go to the top of the next page to see what he said. He says, both fixers are sorted but struggling with the mates. Do you just want me to keep looking? Do you see that there?
Yep.
And then if we can move up page 2 to your reply to that, it's at 1637. Yeah. So on the 21st of August, you say this back to him. I don't mind if they're not fitter's mate. The only thing is, if I don't have 4 extra people on site Monday, I'm in real trouble with the MD of the company I'm working for at the moment. You can always change them over any time. Let me know how you get on. Thanks, Graham. Now, I just want to ask you a few things about that. When you say in the first line, I don't mind if they're not fitter's mate, do you mean you don't mind if they're not fitter's mates?
Mates, yeah.
Yeah. You're not saying, I don't mind if they're not fitters, and then calling him casually
No.
mate.
I didn't mind if they're not fitters mates.
Yeah.
If there was 4 fitters turned up on site,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have mattered.
You were happy.
Because it says later on that he can swap them over anyway.
Yeah. And when you say you can always change them over any time, what do you mean change them over any time?
I.e. going from a fitter to a fitter's mate.
I see.
So you still keep a fitter on site, but instead of paying for 4 fitters, you'd have a fitter's mate and a fitter's working side by side with each other.
So were you saying that you would change a fitter down to a fitter's mate on site, or the other way
Only-
round?
If you had 4 fitters turn up on site,
Yeah.
then you swap them back to 2 fitters and then 2 fitters mates. That's
I
what
see,
it refers
yeah.
to as such.
Okay. Did you ever engage labour on the project who you didn't think had the right skills required to do the job? Were you ever forced into that position in reality?
Not I'm aware of, no.
If we complete this email chain and we go to the top of page 1, towards the bottom of page 1 on the 26th of August, 2015 at 13:50, he replies, "I have replaced all 4 guys, regards." And then at the top of page you thank him. What does he mean by "I've replaced all 4 guys" there?
Don't recall, to be fair.
You don't know.
No.
So you can't recall whether some individuals were replaced for others?
I can't recall, to be fair, and some of it was done by email and other times it was done by a phone only as well. So we might have had a conversation and he just replied as an email later on just to verify it as such. So, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever have cause to say that you didn't want any particular fitters or fitters' mates to return back to site because you were concerned about the quality of their work?
I can't recall anything like that, no.
If we could turn up, this is HAR 30100913. This is Harley's method statement for the installation of the cladding system. Did you ever see a document like this on the Grenfell project?
I can't remember seeing it, but it might have been on site as such, yeah.
I see. This one is dated the 5th of January 2015. We get that from the bottom left corner on that page. And if we turn to page 2 at the top of the document, and it's got persons involved in the, you see in the table at the top, the second line down in the grey is persons involved, and it's got Rob Maxwell, contracts manager, and then the line below is Osborne Berry Installations, and it says they're experienced trained operatives. Yeah, do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, did you always engage experienced and trained operatives on the Grenfell project?
Yes.
Were you ever short of fitters or fitters' mates such that you did end up having people on site that perhaps it wasn't ideal to have there, but you just had to because circumstances forced that?
No.
If we can now turn to TMO 100009962. This is a site inspection report that's been put together by John Rowan and Partners. Can you see that?
Yep.
And we can see that the person that's actually written this is John White. We can see his name is under inspector there. Did you know John White during the time you worked on the project?
I don't recall his name as such, no.
Were you ever aware of being introduced to a clerk of works or someone who might
I
have
think
been...
I got introduced to a clerk of works, but I can't remember his name as such.
I see. Did you ever have an understanding of what that person's role was on the project?
Obviously just to maybe just check the quality of work and what was being done on the job itself.
Did that person check the quality of your work, as far as you understood it?
I don't recall. I can't remember the guy, this John White's name being brought up before in conversation on the site, but maybe he did, I don't know.
But you don't have a recollection of him checking your work?
People have been up and checked our work from, it was either the council, the building inspector or whatever. I do recall times have been people going up there and inspecting our work, but again, name-wise, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Did you ever receive any site inspection reports like this during your time on the project?
Not one like that, no.
Now, we can see in the comments, if we look about halfway down this page in the last paragraph under comments, we need to pan out. Yes, there. In the very last couple of lines there under the comments section, it says the external cladding is still very behind. Instead of an increase in labour, a decrease has happened with only 2 men on site. further delays will occur. Do you see that there?
I do, yeah.
Now, we should have noted that this is a report dated the 11th of September 2015. Can you help us as to whether it's right that there were only 2 men on site fitting the cladding at this point?
I wouldn't have thought there'd only be 2 men on site ever, to be fair, no.
You don't accept that?
No.
Do you ever recall recruiting extra fitters to try and catch up because Osborne Berry was behind programme?
Not behind as such, but the email to the agency was to get extra labour on site, just to, because I think it was more to do with the releasement of the mast climbers themselves,
Yeah.
because they'd done the north and the west first, then they released the east, and eventually they released the mast climbers on the south elevation. So once they released that, you need the extra men just to cover all aspects and all the mast climbers and such.
I see. So there was an increasing demand for fitters as the project went on, is
Exactly,
that right?
yeah. Started off low and then gradually built up over time.
Now, in your second witness statement, if we can just look at this on the topic of inspections, if we look at page 8, this is OSB 6091 at page 8. We can see there, paragraph D at the bottom of the page, you're asked in relation to the inspections, how were those conducted, how frequent were they? And you say, Osborne Berry were not present when inspections by Ryden and Building Control were carried and were not provided with any documents. Do you see that there?
I do, yeah.
Does that remain your evidence that you weren't present when inspections by Ryden and Building Control were carried out?
I wasn't, no.
No. Do you remember ever being provided with a defects list for Grenfell Tower by Ryden that were defects that Osborne Berry had to rectify?
We had some from Harley, but I'm not too sure if we ever had any from Rydens as such, no.
Okay. And then just to be clear on building control, you refer at various points in your witness statement to the results of inspections by building control and the fact there were no issues reported to you. Just to be absolutely clear, were you ever present during any inspections by RBKC building control officers?
No.
So how did you get feedback in practice about what RBKC building control was saying in terms of their inspections?
It would have been for a chain of command. It would be the building inspector, then speak to Rydens, Ryden would then speak to Harley, Harley would speak to us.
Yeah.
So there's always a ladder system as such in place.
Yeah. If we can look at another site inspection report, if we go to RYD 30827333, RYD 30827333. This is an inspection report, this time dated the 16th of June 2015, again by John White. And if we can look on page 2, towards the bottom of this page, the second entry from the bottom, under Review Site Inspection Log Building Control. And in the very first line, under the note part, it says, last building control site visit was the same as before, Friday 15th May 2015. The only observation was that further details of the cladding fire breaks were required. Ryden to confirm if they have done this. Now, were you ever made aware during your work that building control were wanting further details of the cladding fire breaks?
No.
No. Okay. And just to be clear on building control, you're quite clear, are you, that you never had any discussions with anybody who might have been from building control to the effect that the cladding system was compliant with the building regulations and had been fitted to many other buildings throughout England and Wales?
No.
No. Just my last topic now, complaints. I want to turn to an email. This is RYD 3038501. This is an email from Simon O'Connor at Ryden to Ben Bailey at Harley. You're not copied in here. And Simon O'Connor says, afternoon, Ben. I have concerns over a certain member of your staff on site, brackets Bez, Taft's partner, following a number of complaints. These comprise of knocking on windows, asking for tea, banging on people's windows to scare animals, feeding the wrong information to residents, saying it's all been put in the wrong way round because of Ryden and hopefully it won't leak, a complete lack of respect for health and safety, climbing across climbers, dropping material on public footpaths, to mention a few. As you are aware, we are tackling a difficult situation with residents as it is, and these sorts of comments and behaviours only adds fuel to the fire. If I have one more incident on site with this individual, then I will have no option but to remove him from site permanently. And then regards Simon O'Connor. Now I want to give you the chance to respond to this email. We can see now that it appears to be about you and your conduct on site. Did you ever have these concerns communicated directly to you?
No.
So nobody from Harley ever spoke to you about this?
I had an email from Ray Bailey about this email.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I replied to Ray saying that I don't believe what the guy's saying, and it's not in my nature to do this sort of stuff anyway.
I see. Did you ever speak to did you ever speak to Ray Bailey about this?
No, I just sent him an email that night when he replied one to me, and that was it.
When Ben Bailey was asked about this, he said he spoke to the individual and said that the behaviour was unacceptable. Do you agree with that?
He never spoke to me about this, no.
Did you ever tell residents it's all been put in the wrong way around because of Ryden and hopefully it won't leak?
No.
Or anything similar to that?
Nothing at all like that, no.
On the part about a complete lack of respect for health and safety, did you ever climb across climbers?
Unfortunately, I'm not stupid enough to climb across a climb when it's 10 or 12 or 15 floors up in the air. I wouldn't be that stupid or naive to do that, to be fair, no.
Do you know where they got that from, where Ryden got that from?
The only time we ever got to have a mast climber was when we worked on the roof area. Yeah. Where we took the mast climber to the very top of the roof, had a harness on, and we climbed over onto the main part of the roof with a harness clipped on, and that was the only part of, it wasn't jumping, it was more climbing out, going back on, doing our work, and that was it.
What about dropping material on public footpaths?
I don't recall anything like that happening at all, but people are human beings. It can be an instance where someone's dropped a screw or nut, but not me personally or anything like that, and there was never anything major recorded on stuff like that anyway.
So can you explain how they might have thought that you were involved in such activities?
I can't, no.
Were you ever reprimanded or spoken to at any stage about showing a disregard for health and safety on site?
No, if you did, you'd get a warning and a yellow card first, and then eventually, if you were carrying on this manner that he's talking about, you'd be shown a red card and removed from site anyway.
I think we might have the email that you were just referring to. If we could go to HAR 30013714. And I think we can see that this email does appear to have been forwarded to you, and there's your reply at the bottom of the page. At the bottom of the page it's Ray Bailey to you.
Yeah.
And he's saying, Bez, I don't believe that this is true, but we need to be squeaky clean and ultra professional. We've got the job under control and we don't want to give residents any opportunity to complain. Ryden are our biggest customer, Ray. And then your reply at the top is, we've not been any of these things at all. I don't understand any of this stuff we've been accused of. If there is a problem, Ryden's always come and speak to us. We are always polite and professional to all people. Thanks, Bez. So is that the email that you were just referring to?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Just one more question, going back to the mock-ups that we were talking about. Can you help us as to whether it was your understanding that building control had seen both of the mock-ups, the one with just the horizontal cavity barriers and then the one with vertical cavity barriers installed as well?
Sure, they did both of them, yeah.
And when you say I'm sure they did both of them, yeah, is that because you were told that they'd seen and inspected both of those mock-ups?
I can't recall the exact conversation with them, but it would have been, both would have been inspected at different stages and approved as well, yeah.
And you think inspected by building control, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my questions.
Right. Thank you.
So if we could have a maybe a 10-minute break
Yes, all right.
to sweep up. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Berry, Miss Grange, as you heard, thinks she's asked all the questions that she needed to ask you, but she needs an opportunity just to check. And sometimes we have questions sent in by other people who are watching the proceedings. So we'll have a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 12:10 and see if there are any more questions we need to put to you then.
Okay.
All right? If you'd like to go with the usher, and I don't think you'll have much of a chance to talk to anyone else, but please don't take it if you do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I say 12:10.
Thank you, yeah.
If you find that you need more time, then
We'll say thank you.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Berry to come back, please? Right, Mr. Berry, we'll see if Miss Grange has found any more questions for you. Miss Grange.
Just one question.
Only one.
Can you help us, when the mock-up was first done on the exterior that you talked about, of the panels on the spandrels, do you know whether the interior of the flat was also being mocked up at the same time? Can you help us on that?
I think because we were on the exterior of the building, we didn't see anything when the mock-up was first done on the inside, to be fair.
Yeah,
It was
no.
more our side of things was a mock-up on the outside that we'd done.
Yeah,
And then the inside was a different department to us, what we were.
yeah. Thank you. We were just trying to pin down the time when that mock-up might have
No, I
happened.
can't really
No.
remember. to be
Okay.
fair.
Thank you.
That's it, is it?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Berry, those are all the questions we have for you. It just remains for me to thank you very much for coming to give your evidence. It's been very helpful to hear from you. So we're very grateful. And now you're free to go.
Lovely, thank you.
So thank you very much. You'd like to go with the usher? She'll look after you. Well, now, Miss
Yes,
Grange,
thank you.
we have another witness, I think.
Yes, Mr. Mark Dixon, and we just need 10
We
minutes or
just
so
need a few
to...
minutes to
do some
do
cleaning.
the housekeeping. Yes.
Yes.
Well, we'll rise. You send someone to come and fetch us when you're ready.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you very much. Yes, Miss Grange. Now we have another
Yes.
witness, do we?
Mr. Mark Dixon, please.
Yes, please.
Please can I ask you to read out the witness affirmation text that appears on your screen?
Yes. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dixon. Sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
Yes, Miss Grange.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Dixon, thank you very much for coming to give evidence today. We really appreciate it. If you've got any difficulty understanding anything I'm asking you, please ask me to repeat the question or put the point in a different way. And can you please try and keep your voice up, nice and clear, so that the lady sitting to your right can take a clear note of your evidence. Now, you've made one witness statement for the inquiry. If I can take you to that, that's at SDP 50196. It's dated the 26th of September 2019, and if we go on to page 11 of it, we can see there the date. And is that your signature?
Correct.
And have you read that statement recently?
Yes.
And can you confirm that the contents are true?
Correct.
Thank you. Now, you've also provided 3 statements to the Met Police. I'm going to bring each of those up and then just ask you about those. So the first is Met 30056696. It's dated the 18th of December 2017. Can you see that there?
I can.
And I think in this statement you provide certain exhibits to the Met Police. Then if we can pull up, that's just one short statement on one page. If we can pull out the second Met statement, that's MET 3056694. This statement is dated the 20th of December 2018. And again, it's a very short one-page statement where you exhibit certain folders for the Met Police. And then if we can turn up to the third statement, that's MET 3056695. That's dated the 19th of March 2018, and it's a longer statement. Now, have you read those statements, those Met Police statements recently?
Certainly, I believe the longer one I have, the
Yeah.
two shorter ones possibly not.
Yeah, fine. Can you confirm that their contents are true?
I can.
The statements are all in a folder, sorry, I should have said on your desk in front of you, if ever you want to refer to them. Have you discussed your evidence with anyone before coming here today?
No.
Okay. So I want to start with some questions first about your background and experience. It's right, isn't it, that you've worked in the construction industry since 1986?
Yes, I have.
And before becoming a director and shareholder of SD Plastering, is it right that you worked for Ryden for 9 years?
I did, yes.
And is it right that at Ryden you worked in various managerial roles, including project manager and contracts manager?
I did.
And is it right that there you oversaw major refurbishment schemes, including replacing windows?
Yes, I did.
You tell us in paragraph 12 of your statement that you joined SD Plastering in 2005, and there you've overseen dry lining and refurbishment projects for them since that time. Is that right?
I have, yes.
And is it right that SD Plastering is a construction company that undertakes, among other things, dry lining, plastering and general building works?
We're predominantly a dry lining
Yeah.
contractor, and then what we do is we take on refurbishment works and other works that are kind of put in front of us. But the main core of the company is certainly dry lining.
Great, thank you. Now, is it right that at the time that SD Plastering was engaged by Ryden to conduct works at Grenfell Tower, you were also a director and shareholder of SDP Training Solutions Limited? Is that
Yes.
correct? Can we just look at what you say about that at paragraph 9 of your statement? This is at SDP 50196, page 2. It So there we see in the first few lines you explain that you were a director and shareholder of this training solutions company. And then you say the training company provided 10 to 16-week training courses for individuals that wanted to work in the construction industry. Ryden Construction Limited had obtained funding to enrol a number of individuals on one of the training company's courses. Some of the participants enrolled on the training courses provided by the training company will have been involved in carrying out dry lining and plastering works to the lower floors at Grenfell Tower. We see that there.
Yes.
Now, just on that, were you an instructor on those courses?
No.
So who was providing the instruction for that training?
That would have been Rod Shepherd, who would have been one of the other directors.
Right. Did you yourself ever attend that training, so you knew what the training was that was being given?
Yeah, I did. I certainly had a very good understanding of what was going to be carried out.
Did that training involve any training on fire safety in construction and design, for example, around issues of compartmentation, fire spread, combustible materials?
It may have briefly touched on it, but it certainly wasn't part of the criteria to particularly do that. This was more to do with general building work, giving them a scope of what we did overall, and really just trying to encourage individuals to come into our industry.
Yeah, I see. Did such courses ever cover the legal requirements around, say, fire safety in construction? Would it have covered anything to do with that?
No, there was nothing specific that said this is you need to be totally aware of this. No, This was an introductory course. So although it may have touched on, or Rod may have said something that was going on at that time and said, look, you just need to sometimes look at this and look at that, they wouldn't have been in enough depth to be able to say to them, you've got to have a total understanding at this point, because they weren't really taking one direct line into construction. It was about an overview.
Yes, I understand. Do you think that the course would have mentioned the building regulations and in broad terms what those requirements were?
If it had done, it would have been fleeting.
Yeah, okay. Do you know which Ryden personnel who worked on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment actually attended the courses?
I don't have a list that I can confirm that, no.
Okay, fine. And then prior to SD Plastering's involvement on the refurbishment, did you yourself know Mr. Lawrence at Ryden?
Yes.
Yeah. What about Mr. Simon O'Connor?
Yes.
And Mr. Osgood, Daniel Osgood?
Yes, I knew Daniel as well.
And did you know them well? I mean, as a former colleague, were you...
Yeah, I mentored two of them.
You mentored...
I mentored both Simon and Simon O'Connor and Simon Lawrence.
Right.
When I was still at Ryden.
And the purpose of that mentoring, what kind of mentoring were you providing to them?
Well, the fact that they fell under my management. So I would have guided them as they were coming through. So like everybody, anybody that worked under one of my teams, I would have given them some sort of encouragement or directed them, fulfilling the role that I had at that time, whether it be projects manager or contracts manager. Yeah.
And Mr. David Hughes of Ryden has also said in his witness statement that he's known you since your time as a site manager and contracts manager at Ryden. Is that right?
Yeah, I think David's probably one of the people I've known longest.
Yeah. Now, can you help us? Does SD Plastering have any relationship with a company called SD Carpentry Limited?
No.
No. So they're completely separate entities?
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm now going to ask you some questions about when SD Plastering was first approached by Ryden regarding work to the window surrounds. It's that aspect of your works I'm going to focus on.
Yep.
We know that SDP also did some works on the lower floors at Grenfell Tower, but we're not going to be interested in those today. Now, if we can turn to page 3 of your witness statement to the inquiry, SDP 50196, and look at paragraph 13, you say there that in or around April 2015, you were asked by an employee of Ryden, whose identity I can't recall with certainty, if SDP would provide a quotation for undertaking cosmetic works in finishing off the surrounds to newly installed windows in each residential unit at the Grenfell Tower. I believe that this request would have been made verbally during a conversation that took place on site, SDPL having already secured a contract to undertake dry lining and plastering works between myself and one or more of the following individuals. So you list some individuals that you may have spoken to at that time. Is that right?
Yeah, and it may have been a combination of those people that I talked to as well that made me aware of that element of works.
And just to be clear, is it right that SDP were already doing some works at the tower on the lower floors at this point?
Yeah, we were initially engaged to carry out works to the remodelling section of the lower floors.
How sure are you that this was in April 2015? How sure are you of the date there?
Not exactly, but I certainly, through the other documents that I've read now, that this was all taking place between April and May.
Right.
I believe.
Okay.
So there was so originally when I did this, it was around about April. I think I may have had an initial conversation.
Yeah.
But reading all the other documents and the correspondence that have now been given to me, it's clear that it was more towards May and the end of May, I think.
Right, yes. Can I look at a Ryden email at this point? This is an internal Ryden email. RYD 3032519. Now, this is not an email that you would have seen at the time, but if we look at the top, it's an email from Simon Lawrence to Adam Marriott, who was also from Ryden. Is that correct? Did you know Mr. Marriott?
Yes.
Yes. And it's copying in Zach Maynard and Simon O'Connor, also at Ryden. And the subject is Grenfell internal window trimming and boxing works. Do you see that there?
I do.
And if we look at the second bullet down on this page, what he says is this. He says, Mark Dixon has been to site to look at the works, but hasn't provided a price yet. I've spoken to him this morning. He has a few ideas on design and how to improve things. I've told him to price on the installation as per the show flat with us, providing materials just so you can get a comparison against others. If he is in the mix, then we can look him providing materials, design, etc. For him to price, he needs a proper inquiry to be sent by yourself so he knows exactly what is required. So do you see that there?
I do. Yep.
So it would appear that you've been to site to look at the works but haven't provided a price yet. Can you help us? Do you think this would have been for the interior window surrounds in February 2015?
Yeah, again, like you say, I've never seen this email before, and I'm not quite sure of the context. I certainly don't remember going back as far as this, but then even when I was trying to pin the date down of April, that was a little bit guesswork. There are no diaries to tell us where it was, and it may well have been that in one of my visits, someone has said, can you just have a quick look at this
Yeah.
for us and see what you do? Obviously,
Yeah.
my background being that it is with Rydens and I have worked in kind of different parts of refurb, is that I can normally give some sort of guidance or shed some light on perhaps an idea that might make life easier.
Yeah, I see. And where he's referring there to, I've spoken to him this morning, he's got a few ideas on design and how to improve things. Told him to price on the installation as per the show flat. Do you think that was the show flat 145, where they'd done a mock-up?
I'm pretty sure that was the only show flat.
I see. There was only one show flat.
I'm fairly confident there was one show flat.
Yeah, that's helpful. Now we'll come in a bit more detail to what you saw at the show flat in a moment. If we can now turn up RYD 3035207. This is a site progress report that Ryden prepared, and it's dated March 2015. And again, I'm not suggesting you would have necessarily seen this document, but I want to ask you something about what's in it. In the middle of the first page, paragraph 1, if we can look down the page, can you see there are some numbered paragraphs in the middle?
Yep.
After the first lot of boxes? It says this, so this is March 2015, it says, it is proving difficult to source window trimming subcontractor. Harley's and SD Carpentry are too expensive, and SD Plastering are not interested. And then Everglades and Fairview are being approached, order now critical to avoid delay for programme. Now, looking at that, is it right that at this point, SD Plastering, so you had said that you weren't interested in those works?
No, I think what the comment there, I think what it actually means is when someone says to me, can you do this, the first thing I look at is resource.
Yeah.
And if I don't have the resource, I'm not going to say, yeah, give it to me, and then I'll make your life a misery. I would have probably said, I'm going to struggle to resource this at this point in time. So I've still got all these other works to complete. I'll leave that with somebody else.
I see.
And that's probably why the lack of interest.
And do you think that you expressed that lack of interest after you'd seen the show flat or before you'd gone into the show flat?
Probably on a few occasions. It wouldn't have been on one occasion. It would have probably been just me constantly reassessing. And say if I'd gone there on a day and I was running about and everybody caught me and said, "Oh, I need you to come and look at this," I said, "No, I probably haven't got time to do that." So, but it is just assessing where we sit as far as delivery. That's what kind of the main factor.
So do you recall being asked on multiple occasions whether you would be happy to take on this work?
No, I don't really recall, but I know through process that I would have probably been asked several times.
And can you help us as to what changed such that you did subsequently put in a quotation for that work?
For the exact reason that they've kind of said there, that they were struggling to get someone to do it. They needed the confidence whoever could deliver it correctly in the right time scale. And I think probably when they come back to me, the circumstances on site would have changed slightly, and I would have said, okay, then I'll try and help out.
Yeah. Now, I said I'd come on to it. The meeting at the pilot flat, flat 145. If we can turn up at this point, paragraph 17 of your inquiry statement, that's SDP 50196, page 4. So here, I think what you're describing at this point is when you looked at the example window surround and you go on to talk about members of the management team. So you say the example window surround consisted of a number of pieces of plastic soffit and fascia board that had been attached to the window reveal sill and header. One of the management team explained that they were not happy with the standard of finish that had been achieved because, amongst other things, the plastic soffit and fascia boards were prone to bowing. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And can I be clear, you're then describing your visit to the show flat, are you, the pilot flat here?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where I got the recollection is I remember those conversations. I can't remember if they came before, after, or during that visit.
Yeah. And where you're referring, and you refer to it a number of times in your statement, to the plastic soffit and fascia board, is that what we know of as the UPVC?
Yes.
The windows.
The cover sections, yes.
Yeah. And are they two different things, the plastic soffit and fascia board, or are they
no,
one?
it was
that's
pretty
one
much
item?
the same product on every elevation.
Yeah, thank you. And here you're describing meeting the management team. We'll come on to that in a moment. Is it right, though, that Mr. Cole of SD Plastering also attended this meeting with you?
I believe he would have done, yes.
Yeah. And is it right that Mr. Cole is an employee of SD Plastering, and he was SD Plastering's site manager for the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project?
For part of that project, yes.
Which part did he site manage?
He would have managed exactly this part.
Yeah. And so you talk about meeting the management team. Is that various personnel at Ryden that you met?
Yeah, again, I think probably on the occasion of this, it would have been Simon O'Connor. It may have been 2 or 3 other different people in there as well. And certainly while it was going on, we may have seen more than one manager in there. But I think it was, I think it was Simon O'Connor that would attended the first meeting. But again, it's quite a few years ago now, and I can't quite remember which manager was with us.
Okay, that's helpful. Does that mean you don't think it would have been Simon Lawrence at that stage?
I'm going to say no, because I can't imagine Simon would have got involved in that meeting at that time.
Yeah. Now, we saw that you say there that one of the management team explained they were not happy with the standard of finish that had been achieved. So you're actually inspecting an installation at this point, aren't you?
I'm looking at what the aesthetics are. I'm looking at what it looks like in the window, and the most obvious thing is that there's too many components in it.
But just take it one step at a time. They had done a mock-up, had they? Ryden's done a mock-up.
Ryden's and whoever they'd asked to do that had done a mock-up, yes.
And were you ever told of who'd put that mock-up together?
No, but since then, again, reading documentation afterwards, I've seen, I can't remember the company exactly that was put it in, but I have seen their name mentioned since then.
I see. Okay, so it wasn't you, it wasn't SDP.
It certainly wasn't SDP.
Yeah. And you were being asked to comment on the quality of that example window surround at that meeting, were you?
No, I don't think I was asked to comment on the quality. I think what their main frustration was that they'd already made their minds up that the product itself was a bit there was too many elements to it, so we were trying to simplify what it looked like. So there was a lot of joins in it. And then when you added pressure to some of the sections, you could clearly see that it wasn't supported at the back, which means that you was getting these bowing in the seals.
Now, just breaking that down, you say there were a lot of joins in it. Do you mean a lot of joins in the UPVC trimming around the edge?
Yes.
There were lots of joins in that part?
Yep.
Yeah. And you said that there wasn't support at the back. What do you mean by that?
Well, meaning that the width of it, so the cavity at the rear, so when you fix these in place, if it's supported underneath, then there's the likelihood of a bowing is not going to happen as long as you use the right fixings underneath. But at the rear of it, where obviously it butted the window, where the gap was, if you put pressure on it, and what they were afraid of is the longevity of it, if you put pressure on it, you could then move it, which will just result eventually of it becoming dislodged.
So it was bowing at the back of the sill, is that right?
I believe it was, they were more concerned with the rear of the sill.
With the rear of the sill. What about the jams down the side and the head? Was anyone concerned about the bowing there?
The principles would have been the same, but I think you need to remember that vertically you're putting less pressure on it than you are horizontally. Seals are traditionally used to put books and weights and everything else on, and to put your hands on, whereas the vertical side and certainly the head, you're never going to touch the head.
Yeah. Now, looking at paragraph 18 there on that page, and reading on in your statement, you say, Andrew Cole proceeded to dismantle the example window surround to assess the manner in which it had been installed. We noted that the bowing occurred where the plastic soffit and fascia boards spanned the gap, as nothing had been used to bridge the gap in order to provide the necessary support to the plastic soffit and fascia board. An EDPM gasket had been installed around the new window to create a weatherproof seal, which meant it was not possible to see the interface between the new window unit and the surrounding walls. So we've got a good description there, and the bowing that you're describing there is what you were just talking about just now, is it? Yes. And is it right then that where there was the gap around the edges of the windows, once you've gone beyond the old window frame, that on the mock-up that you saw at that point, there was nothing at all underneath the UPVC?
Yeah, well, that's my recollection of it, but reading again an email further on, Simon Lawrence mentions that actually when they did the mock-up, they'd used some Celotex to support and to close that gap. Now, that may have been on one of the other sample windows, and the one that we exposed at that time didn't have it in, so, and hence why the bowing was there.
I see, yeah. Now, if we could just look at Mr. Cole's witness statement at this point, if we go to that, this is SDP 50220 at page 3. And I want to look at paragraph 14 on that page and what he says. He says, I recall that discussions took place between those individuals present at the meeting, including the Ryden employee, about how the bowing could be resolved. Whilst I cannot remember who originally came up with the idea, it was suggested that the old aluminium window frame should be removed and that insulation board could be used to bridge the gap between the new window and the timber window surrounds to provide the support for the plastic soffit and fascia board. I cannot recall anything being discussed about the type of insulation that would be used. So do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you agree with Mr. Cole that it was at that meeting that somebody suggested that insulation board could be used to bridge the gap and try and overcome the bowing issue?
Yeah, I'd imagine there was half a dozen different scenarios that were discussed, but that was the one that was actually implemented.
Do you think that it may have been you who made that suggestion?
It could have been, but I can't remember.
Okay. In his oral evidence to the inquiry, Mr. Lawrence suggested that this was a decision taken jointly by Ryden and SD Plastering. Would you agree with that?
It would certainly been discussed. No one person takes a decision on their own. It would have been between everybody. But again, what we would have done was we would have perhaps put an idea forward to be signed off by everybody else.
He agreed with the suggestion that the solution for remedying this issue was a bit of trial and error. He said that on day 25, page 40, line 23, and day 25, page 58, line 4. Would you agree that remedying that issue did involve a bit of trial and error?
Possibly, but some of that trial and error have already occurred by doing the actual first sample of it. So whoever carried out the first one, they may have carried out 2 or 3 different scenarios as well.
Yeah.
So that trial and error refers to might not just be to us, it may be to whoever carried out the original sample.
Yeah. As far as you were concerned, was there then a bit of a process of trial and error after this point in terms of doing another mock-up to see whether
I don't recall that it was. I think pretty much it was, I think the first time that they tried this out by supporting the seals at the back, by putting the insulation board in there under compression, it was given the result that they wanted.
I see. And when was that carried out?
That I'm unsure about, but it is listed somewhere because I think there's also an email from Daniel Osgood talking about the show flat, trying to get it ready, and it's falling behind. So it would have been a period before that, but I couldn't give you the exact date.
Yeah, I think we might be coming on to that.
Okay.
In his evidence to the inquiry, Mr. Lawrence said that the choice of a solid insulation board was discussed at this point. Do you remember that?
I don't, but possibly.
Was there any discussion or consideration at that meeting about how filling the gaps between the new windows and the old timber window surrounds in that manner might affect the compartmentation of the flat in terms of fire safety?
No.
Was fire safety discussed at all?
No.
Were you told anything at this point about what might be around the windows already as installed by Harley?
No, there was no discussion over the strategy.
And I think you said in your statement that, or we saw that you couldn't see beyond the EDPM membrane because that had been put around. Does that mean that you didn't know what was beyond that membrane in terms of the windows surround?
No, we wouldn't have tried to look at the facades on the outside and trying to piece it all together. We were dealing with the bit that we'd been allocated, which was to provide an aesthetic finish to those reveals.
Yeah. Now, we looked at Mr. O'Connor's email about Mark Dixon going to site in February 2015. Do you think it's possible that this meeting at the pilot flat we've just discussed actually did happen in around February 2015?
It could have done, but it may have also been that I hadn't gone there specifically to deal with that. It may well be that I've gone there to deal with all the other things I dealt with on a daily basis, and then I was asked to just go and inspect it and give my thoughts on it.
In that email, Mr. Lawrence said that you discussed ideas on design and how to improve things, that was a discussion had with you. Would you agree that you were discussing with the Ryden people ideas on design and how to improve things?
Yeah, well, I can't recollect it, but I'm certainly accused many times of imposing my opinion on people, yeah.
I see. If we can then turn to paragraph 19 of your witness statement, so that's on page 4. So then, following the story through, you say one of the management team instructed SDPL to produce an alternative configuration for finishing off the window surrounds, that 1 was more aesthetically pleasing than the example window surround, 2 was easier to install than the example window surround, and 3 would remedy the bowing in the example window surround. And you described that as the works.
Yes.
And when you're referring there to the management team, do you mean Ryden asked SDP to produce the alternative configuration?
I do, yes.
And can you help us as to what exactly Ryden asked you to do in practice?
That was the criteria they put in front of me.
And they actually gave those 3 criteria, did they?
But it would be verbally, yeah. It would have been learned from what we'd already seen in the show flat that it was difficult to install. It was not a quick process. It needed to affect the residents as less as possible, but leave them with something that was pleasing to the eye and wasn't going to give them a load of stress. Keep staring at every day after that point.
Yeah. And when you say it would have been done verbally, can you recall who you had that conversation with?
No.
Did you get the impression at this time that Ryden was leaving it to SDP to come up with a design solution for the window surrounds?
No, I think it was certainly a collaboration between the two of us. I think with all of these things is that any management team, such as Ryden or every main contractor, will call on the skills and input from other people around them to try and get together as many ideas as possible.
Did you get any specific guidance from Ryden about how they wanted the design to end up?
No more than what's written on the screen.
Yeah. Were you ever provided with any information by Ryden when doing this alternative configuration? For example, were you ever given any specification for materials that should be used with it?
No.
Now, looking back at paragraph 16 of your statement at this point, on page 4, you say this. You say, as the new windows were installed beyond the original building line, a gap was created between the newly installed windows and the old timber window surrounds, which remained in situ following the removal of the old aluminium framed windows. The width of the gap was approximately 60 millimetres to 100 millimetres, that depth varying slightly between the units. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did that fact that the windows were installed significantly beyond the building line, leaving that gap, ever give you any cause for concern about the design of the window surrounds?
No, it hadn't. I hadn't looked at it and gone, well, that's going to be a problem apart from bridging it, because
Right.
the criteria that we've been given was literally to make this an aesthetic finish, bridge that gap, make sure it stays in place.
Yeah. Did you ever think about whether that gap might create a vulnerability for fire around the windows?
Not at the time.
Had you ever worked on any similar refurbishment project for windows, where windows have been installed beyond the building line and you've got to try and bridge a gap?
No.
So this was a unique problem, was it, that you came up against?
It was unique for us, but it wasn't necessarily unique for Rydens.
Had you ever previously been involved in any window refurbishment work in a high-rise residential building?
I can't recollect one. I think the only one that I'd done with Rydens was for Laker Court, which was one of the early ones where I was an assistant site manager, or actually I was a senior site manager at that point. But I think we refurbed those windows, though. I don't believe, they might have been replaced, yeah, but they stayed on the same building line, so it wouldn't have become apparent.
And that building, Laker Court, was that a high-rise building?
I want to say 11 stories.
11 stories, okay. Were you or Mr. Cole ever provided with any design drawings showing how the windows should be configured in these internal window reveals?
No, and again, if we had been, then that's what would have been replicated on site.
You describe in your statement these works to be cosmetic. You say that at paragraph 13 of your statement, and then at paragraph 20 you say that the works were of a purely decorative nature. Was that your view when you were being asked to tender for these works, that this work to the interior of the windows was purely cosmetic and decorative?
It was to create the finish line on the inside of the new window install.
And then perhaps before we break, if we can just look at an email. This is RYD 30400428. This is an email from Adam Marriott, if we look at the top of the page, to you, dated the 1st of May 2015, CCing in Simon O'Connor. And he says, morning, Mark. Further to your telephone conversation with Steve yesterday, please can we look to agree a cost for the Windows Surround package today? I believe your carpenter is on site this morning to agree with Simon O'Connor an easier method of installation. Once installed, please call to discuss further. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, it begins with further to your conversation with Steve yesterday. Was that a conversation with Steve Blake?
Correct.
And can you recall what was said in that conversation?
No, I think it would have been no more than Steve just saying, can you try and help us out here? Can you try and make this work for us?
Yeah. And then there's reference to your carpenter being on site to agree with Simon O'Connor an easier method of installation. Who was that carpenter?
I can't recollect that.
So that wouldn't have been Mr. Cole?
No, it wouldn't have been Andy.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment for a break. Yes, it is.
Good. All right, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Dixon, we're going to have a break now so we can all get some lunch. We'll come back at 2 o'clock, please.
Yep.
And while you're out of the room, I have to ask you, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it.
Excellent.
All right?
Thank you.
Would you like to go with the usher then, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
2
you.
o'clock then, please. Thank you.